Ever since I remembered my 5th birthday, I've been asking myself this one question. A question that I still don't have an answer for. Why would anyone tell a 5-year-old such a messed up story? I guess I shouldn't be too shocked, considering the other stories my grandma told me as a kid. Oh God, I really shouldn't be surprised at all. Japanese folklore is terrifying and creepy as all heck. What follows is a memory from my 5th birthday. I must have buried it for years, as it took weeks and weeks of therapy to finally bring it to the surface. So there I was. Grandma, can you tell me a story before bed? She was almost at the bedroom door when I stopped her with that question. I didn't want her to leave. Grandma had just tucked me in and switched off my lamp, but I suddenly felt scared. Partly it was the darkness. Shadows were so dense I could barely make out my stuffed toys. But mostly it was my new birthday present. A gift from Grandma. It wasn't my main present. That was a pack of monster in your pocket toys I'd opened downstairs. No. This was an extra gift. It was a secret gift from Grandma. And let me tell you something. I actually hated it. Even in the dark, its shadowy shape was visible on my bedside table. The thing gave me chills. My grandma replied, "A story? Well, what kind of story would you like?" It was a silly question because my grandma, my Oba-chan, only ever told one kind of story. Scary stories. But because I was already feeling uneasy, I said something I normally wouldn't. "Oh, nothing too scary, Grandma." She raised both her eyebrows. "Not too scary?" I shook my head as she leaned over, turned my light back on and sat at the foot of my bed, smiling at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see Grandma's gift watching me from the table. I tried to ignore it. "All right," she said, settling in. "I think I'll tell you a story about a witch." And here's her story. "Once upon a time," Grandma began, "there was a young woman living in a cottage by the sea. She had a carefree life, going to school, painting, and reading adventure books by the fire. This girl lived with her mother and grandmother, who she loved deeply. One early summer day, she was on her way home from school when she met a boy. She hadn't spoken to him before but recognized him by his uniform. She guessed he was a year above her. "Where are you off to?" he asked, a cigarette in his mouth, shirt untucked. The girl hesitated. Her mother had warned her about cigarettes and strangers, but was he really a stranger? Their headmaster often said they were, one big family at school. If he wore the same uniform, he couldn't be a stranger, could he? "I'm going home," she answered. "I live along this path." The boy finished his cigarette, flicking it into the grass, and smiled. "You want to see something cool before you go home?" She wanted to, but she also couldn't be late. Her mum would worry. She thanked him, saying she had to get home. But just as she walked past, he called out again. "It's a puppy! Our dog had puppies last week, and Dad said I could keep one. It's in a barn near my house. Want to see it?" Now, the girl, like all young girls, loved puppies. She'd wanted one for as long as she could remember, but her mum always said they couldn't afford one. Right then and there, she'd have given anything to see a puppy. She closed her eyes, imagining it, a happy dog with a big tongue and a wagging tail, eager to meet her. She paused, looking back down the path toward home, then back at the boy, smiling at her. Could it hurt to just take a quick look? So the girl followed the boy over a stile and across a large field, walking faster and faster as the excitement grew, the boy laughing and keeping pace. The girl didn't start to feel nervous until they reached the barn. The walk had taken longer than she expected, and the sun was lower now. She was definitely going to be late getting home. She just wanted to see the puppy and leave, but the barn was shadowy, and she couldn't see any sign of it inside. "It's at the back," whispered the boy, taking her hand. "He'll be so happy to see you." So she held his hand tightly, even though it was sweaty, suddenly starting to feel afraid. She only became terrified when she heard footsteps and laughter behind her, and saw two older boys coming out of the barn's shadows. When the girl finally got home, the sun was setting, painting the sea blood red. She collapsed inside the door, sobbing. It was her grandmother that found her. Now, her grandmother was old and wise. Her mother often said she knew the world's secrets. The girl had been scared of her grandmother as a child, but now the old woman held her, soothing her, telling her she could tell her anything. And there in the hallway, the girl did. She told the grandmother everything. The boy, the barn, the terrible things those older boys had done to her. Her grandma listened in silence. "Come with me," she'd said. The girl had rarely been in her grandma's room, which was filled with strange paintings and statues that actually really frightened her as a child. But now, seated in her grandmother's room, she hardly noticed. Her grandmother was speaking in a calm voice, and all she could do was listen. Her grandmother told her there was a special trick, a way to protect against evil so those boys could never harm her again. As her grandmother spoke, she opened a wooden box full of knitted dolls, each with blank faces except for the eyes, which seemed to watch the girl. Her grandmother took 3 dolls, then closed her eyes and began whispering. Soon, the dolls were lined up, and her grandmother had knitting needles and yarn ready. "Describe the boys," she whispered, "so I can protect you. Let your grandmother protect you." Though she was scared, the girl did as asked. Her grandmother worked, and as the sun set, the dolls were finished. Her grandmother took the girl's hands, looking into her eyes. "Keep these dolls close, my love," she whispered. "As long as you have them, those boys can never hurt you again." And you know what? They never did. 2 days later, as the girl sat by the sea, her grandmother rushed in, holding a newspaper with a trembling hand. The headline read, "3 brothers tortured and killed in brutal mass slaying." "Mariko," her grandmother whispered, "what did you do?" But the girl only smiled, taking her grandmother's hand. She led her upstairs and opened a box. Inside were the dolls, impaled with pins, their legs scorched black. "What did you do, Mariko?" her grandmother asked again. But it was all too clear what she'd done. And she just smiled, whispering, "They won't hurt anyone again." Now that was the end of the story my grandma told me. "See, sweetheart," Grandma said, standing up from my bed and turning off the light. "I gave you a nice, happy ending. Not too scary." In the dark, I felt sick. I didn't understand everything Grandma said, but I knew I felt worse than before. "Grandma, wait!" I called, stopping her. "Isn't your name Mariko?" And she looked back and smiled, kissing my forehead. "Good night, my love," she whispered. "Remember, that present I gave you is always there if you need it." She left and I stared at a gift. The one that I've hated ever since. A small knitted doll with two blank, staring eyes.